Hello and welcome to the Constraints Collective podcast. My name is Martin Rothwell. In today's episode, we're joined by Pete Arnott from the Practice Thinkers podcast. Pete has a master's by research in the CLA and is also a golf coach who is guided by the CLA in practice. The aim of today's episode is to explore how and why Pete has adopted the CLA and take a deep dive into applications of the CLA in his golf practice. So, welcome, Pete.
Thanks for having me on, Martin and Ian. Thank you very much.
No worries. Ian, how you doing? So, sorry, Pete. Where are you at the minute? Whereabouts are you in the
I
world?
am in Scotland, the middle of Scotland, the Falkirk.
All right, okay. And you in the usual place, Ian?
Yeah, just in Brisbane. Yeah, cold day today. It was about 18 degrees, so we're
All right.
freezing a bit today.
Poor you. Yeah.
Yeah,
So as I say in this episode, we're really keen to delve into like practice. And I know before we started recording, Pete mentioned about certain terms or concepts that he sort of not struggled with, but wanted to learn more about and how that would influence or be applied in his practice. So yeah, I think we really want to delve into that and understand how we can use the CLA in golf practice, but also other individual sports. I think this might be more relevant to that in this episode today because we have had quite a strong focus on team sports. So really interested to get into that. So Pete, if you don't mind just sharing with us, like where did it all start for you? Like what was maybe you doing before you sort of started reading about the constraints approach. And yeah, if you could just give us a bit of an overview, that would be great.
I came actually, I'd a profession in IT, came late to kind of coaching in my early 30s, changed my career. So I kind of got lucky. So I didn't probably go the traditional route of stumbling across CLA, midway through my coaching career. One of my mentors, Graham McDowell, was doing a master's in kind of skill acquisition. He was reading a lot of this stuff. He was a lecturer where I went to do my coaching degree. So he shared, it was basically the Brazilian football paper. I think it was the 2010 or 9 paper where they explored the development history of like the kind of 60s and 70s Brazilian players like Garrincha, Socrates, and like how the environment shaped their massively shaped their movement and their skill, and how they found that when they got to academies it was easy because they'd grown up favelas on uneven surfaces, and a lot of that kind of made sense, and it was at odds with a lot of the golf coaching stuff that I was reading at the time of like very technique focused, and really it's how I developed my own game with friends, not no coaching. It was just like really highly competitive on the golf course. But maybe that's a model not to make it, because I wasn't a reasonable golfer, but I don't make a living playing golf. So, but I suppose it suited my bias as well. But yeah, and then just got deeper and deeper into the constraints, did the coaching degree, applied it more, questioned it. As I said off air, a lot of the stuff that was reading with the research was quite difficult with the wording of it. I had a dictionary in front of me, I think, most of the time. But then I reached out to individuals like Ian. So Ian and I have kind of co-authored 2 books now, haven't we, Ian? So, and just asked questions like, what does this mean to like actually applying it in the real world? Whereas I found that some of the stuff in the papers didn't bring that to life. But then when you talk to like Ian or other individuals in this area who are actually applying it, it really, really helps. So, recently Ian and I have been talking about emotion, and like how that affects behavior. Well, it's not recently, we've talked about it for quite a while. But an example of that would be, I had a guy in lesson T's just finished quite a intensive morning of meetings, and let's just say he's not in the greatest of moods. That's massively affecting his golf swing, and you can see it. He's angry. He's the rhythm of his golf swing's completely changed. So we have a chat about that. We explore different moods and rhythms. Starts hitting the ball a little bit better. And then halfway into the lesson, I get him to think about the meetings he's had this morning. He hits it off the planet again. Yeah. He's
That means all over the place, doesn't it,
Yeah.
Pete? Off the planet, not brilliantly.
No, it's not. It's not far. Basically, not in the direction he wanted it to go. Yeah, that's golf speak. Sorry. Give me a kick.
Yeah,
Golf speak. Yeah, so, and I've seen that recently with, like, I'm a consultant for Swiss Golf. I'm a performance and practice coach for their professional golfers. Just been out in Seville and Challenge Tour, watched it with an individual who was massively affected by slow play, and it affected his behavior on the golf course in a negative way. He got extremely angry with slow play, and his reflections was it changed the way he moved. He was more tense, and also his decision making. When we unpacked it, his decision making was quite poor when he was under these emotional constraints, if you could say that. So yeah, and then I think then that for me alludes to where a lot of individuals don't grow up in training environments where there's emotion involved. Like, it is actually stripped out. It's taken out of the training environment because maybe it's easier for the coach, or maybe it's like the coach isn't aware of that, or the player as well, to be fair. Yeah.
I think, just jumping in, Pete, I think there's a belief that you have to learn the technique without emotion, so that when you've got this technique perfected and stabilized, you can then, when emotion's brought in, it will hold up under pressure.
Yeah.
And I guess my experience from golf, and you'll have seen it far more, is that that's absolute rubbish.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's any sport, it's being able to deal with all these emotions that come up in your competitive environment, and to me that has to be in the training environment as well, to some extent. Obviously, you've got to like tailor it to the individual. But if you're never facing these emotions in training, how can you expect to like deal with them in a performance environment? So, for example, that individual, we're going to, next time we're training, we do warm weather camps in the winter, definitely going to get slow play in front of him. We're purposely going to put like more players out in front of him to slow it down, so that he has to like deal with it, and like it opens up more conversations. It doesn't have to be complicated. Like, you just thinking about, well, what are the things that you are going to face in your competitive environment, and then trying to put them in training. That's, to me, the main thing that I've learned from the constraint stuff is the representativeness of it. Like, how can we make training more representative, like more whole?
And how,
out of interest, Pete, would that be a collaboration with this individual, or would you manipulate in the environment to present that, or would it be a very open conversation saying, look, today we're going to work on, or we're going to have some slow play, so this is what you're going to experience? Or
that's a great question. On you go. Yeah, sir.
Yeah, or is it something that you'd sort of, not to be sneaky as such, but of course we just don't know what competition is going to look like. So, that unpredictability in practice is probably equally as important. But I just wondered how would you frame that for that individual, or would it be different for different individuals?
I think it's a both. So I've done both. So I've put like patches in before. So like group training where I'll put like a 4-ball out in front of a 2-ball, right? Or I'll purposely say for one in the group, right, if you've got to play slow here and annoy the other individuals, like walk, like poor behavior, and if they don't basically clock you, you get a shot off your score after 9 holes, right? And they're playing against each other, right? So so I do it sneakily, and also like do it where they'll kind of figure out, when we put them out in front of or behind like a lot of slow players. But and then I'll simulate. I remember one time we had a hexoskin with a player on, so basically hexoskin measures your breathing rate and all that. And I've got it on my phone, and this player struggled, lost a tournament with slow play, because he had to wait like 40 minutes on a tee while he was leading the tournament. So simulated slow play, basically I put him out with a slow player, right? And in training. And then we're playing for money because they're professional golfers. And then I basically said, you're on the clock, so I'm the referee now. So you've only got like X amount of time to hit a shot. And like he was absolutely steam coming out his ears because it wasn't his fault, he like and but I've got the hexo skin on him. I can see his breathing rate go up and everything, right? And next hole he hits one like miles offline. Yeah. And
Off the
so it's like,
planet.
yeah, off the yeah, off the
Ian,
planet.
was it, Pete? It wasn't Ian, was it?
Could have been.
Yeah.
No, I don't need to add emotion for Ian. It goes off the planet.
Because of the planet anyway.
I'm only kidding you.
No, it's true.
Yeah, so it's a bit of both, Martin.
Yeah.
I think there's definitely a role for being sneaky sometimes. And
And so on that, P, I know we've talked about this before, is that just by exposing them to those environments, does it lead to that automatic change, or
no,
how do you help them? How do you help
not at
them
all.
with that
Not,
process?
not at all.
Yeah.
I've had. I think it opens up a conversation. For some, it does. For some, it's the realization that this behavior is not helping me. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And recent individual watching a tournament plays, kind of having a pity party to himself, and he's missed so many things with the other player's what it was doing in the air and how the ball was stalling in the air when in the wind, and he
Yeah.
hit exactly the same shot because he was so busy, like as I say, having a little pity party to himself. But then when I highlighted that behavior afterwards and said, "Look, is this helping your performance?" He's like, "Absolutely not." And he's just switched. His behavior's completely changed when he realized that it was not helping him. So
That's important of a reflection then,
yeah,
of building deliberate reflection in afterwards.
absolutely. So I think it really depends on the individual, the conversation you have. I'm not a psychologist, but I have done a lot of reading in psychology, so I can maybe do the kind of basics of it. And yeah, I think I used to think with constraint stuff that early on that it was all osmosis. You could just create the environment and like it would just happen. But now the more I coach, I think it's creating an environment, and sometimes it will happen by osmosis. Like the environment will shape behavior. Sometimes you need to step in and go, look, do you need any help with this? Like, can we all have a conversation on this behavior, or how can we design your training better because this isn't transferring, or I think it's always for me a two-way conversation with the player. I'm lucky that most of the time it's individuals I'm coaching. Like it's not. I think you've done a lot of stuff on team, but so you can really get in the weeds with individuals if you've got enough time with them.
It's a really interesting point, isn't it? Because we often get a lot of, constraints is great for team games, but no good for individual sports and everything. Then I think what you're saying, we obviously believe, is that it works on both levels as well. So and allows you to be more individualized in your design. Like it's more complicated in some ways for teams.
Yeah, and
Sure.
and to me that the CLA, again back to the representative of training environment, how important it is to watch and see your players in the real environment. The commercialization of golf coaching, I'm lucky I get to do what I love and I get paid for it. But it does lend itself to hitting balls in the driving range. It's much easier to give somebody an hour lesson on a driving range than actually go out in the golf course and watch their behaviors and how their decision making, their emotional side. I mean, the amount of times that I see players just default to technique when they hit a bad shot on the golf course because that's all they know.
Pete, can
Yeah,
you tell us about? Sorry, I came over to Scotland, not New Zealand. I don't know, about 2016, 2017, and watched you and Graham do a whole day with some pretty decent golfers. And you so I think there was it 12 golfers, and the highest handicap was a was a 4 handicap.
Yeah, they were
There was
all
some a lot better than that. But
good
how
amateurs.
you managed to individualize that on giving them some short game practice. You just tell us all about that and how some of the observations of that when you were watching it. So it's a great game.
A long time ago, yeah, I can't even remember.
I can remember it. You can't.
I think it was a group challenges with certain score based.
Yeah, so you had to. There was on this. It's a short game area, so there's about 100 meters area approach, and then a green, and they had to get up and down 3 times on the trot. So they had to get the ball in the hole in 2, 3 times on the trot, but they could pick the distance that they went from.
Yeah.
And the winner won money, like everything has to do with money in golf, I think, with you guys. But they had the person who got the most combined distance over those 3 shots won the money. I think it was money or brand new balls or something.
Yeah.
So you could pick your strategy, couldn't you?
Yeah, so I do remember it now. So it was basically it was up to you. So you could literally go from like 10 feet and do 2, but then you would only have 30 feet in total, you know. Whereas like the winner after I think we played it for a couple of hours was the one that was the furthest back, so had the most footage of three twos in a row essentially. So it created their own kind of challenge point where and a lot of them actually made it too difficult for themselves, if I remember rightly. And there was a few struggling with it. Again, that opened up the conversation of like challenge point, their level. Yeah.
Yeah. It was fascinating watching them because they went on a leaderboard. You kept the leaderboard over
Yeah,
those 2 hours.
we had a like a whiteboard there, didn't we? And so they could visually see who was doing what. Kind of again simulating tournament play because like a lot of these guys, there will be at some point a leaderboard in front of them.
Yeah,
and I think that approach is so powerful. I suppose it's what Carl Woods originally wrote about, this idea of co-design. So it's that interaction between the coach, the individual, the athlete, the golfer, and the practice task, the environment, what's going on. It's that continuous interaction, and you're manipulating, or in that interaction, you're manipulating different constraints to find that challenge point or that sweet spot of where that real learning can take place. So I think that's a really useful approach. Yeah, really powerful.
I find, the observations for this is, and we've talked about this before, but when you throw an individual that's maybe not used to like the cognitive demands of tournament play and training, their capacity to do that for long periods of time is quite low. So you see them getting frustrated quite early. They cognitively switch off because they've been used to basically hitting balls aimlessly, right? Instead of like creating these situations which have more emotion, more decision making, more like golf. Whereas like the individuals that were in that task, I remember it vividly because there was a couple of pros in it actually. Now that you're rejogging my memory, a couple of pros in there that trained a lot, and they could handle the 2 hours doing it. But there was one individual in particular that never done this training before, and within 20, 30 minutes, toys were at the pram, really struggling, right? It was completely at odds with what he was used to doing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Surely that would then be reflective. Sorry, surely that would be then reflective of the way that individual would engage with competition. Is that right, Pete? Do you know what I mean? So if when it got tough in competition, would the same outcome be true?
100%. Yeah. So, like I coached the individual at the time. Just started coaching him. He was more used to like how his swing looked and like how it visually and like hitting balls, and this training was new to him. So it did. I remember having to take him out of the session and have a chat with him. Yeah, because he was struggling that much with it.
It's interesting. I remember he was a 4 handicapper, but his short game wasn't to a 4 handicap level. So he'd obviously drove it really well and got away with it that way. But this game found him out.
Yeah.
And I do remember it was in the days before COVID where you had to take the flag out to make a putt. And he was, and you know, so he stopped going through all his routines. He'd stopped taking the flag out.
Yeah.
He didn't take his glove off. He didn't line the putt up.
Yeah.
He was having a complete strop, wasn't he? Really?
Yeah.
And it was funny to watch, you know. So, well,
Yeah,
not
but I
funny.
think that there's also a time where you've got to go, right, okay, we need to have a chat. You know, like it's
Yeah,
not
yeah,
that the
yeah.
training isn't beneficial for this individual now. Yeah, it's just then
No.
taking them out and going, right, well, what's the purpose of this game? Why are we doing it? You know, reinforcing it.
Yeah.
And I think that's sometimes where I've failed with some of this stuff, is creating these environments for individuals maybe never experienced it before, is like framing it beforehand. Why are we doing this? Like the purpose of the session. I think you touched on that earlier on, Martin, about the rabbits analogy. I thought that was quite good.
Yeah. So if you chase 5 rabbits, you catch none. If you chase one, you might catch one. So yeah, I must credit Danny for that. It's not my idea, but yeah, Danny Newcombe. But yeah, I think that's important. Yeah, that's why I asked the previous question. I mean, I suppose the way I would, or not always, but I would always like this is the purpose of the session, and it's normally a two-way thing. So it would maybe from the week before, for example, we've identified certain things that we need to improve, and then it's okay, we've agreed these things, but today we're going to focus on this one. And we've had, I would then try and design that with the players before that excuse me, before that session. So I was just curious, but I just wonder sometimes is there worth in, again, I don't think sneak is the right word. That's got a bad sort of meaning, but you know what I mean? Is this sometimes a bit of unpredictability is probably a better way of saying it, because we never know what's going to happen in competition. All right, we might know there's going to be a tee off and we've got to get the ball into the hole over there. But other than that, we don't know what's going to happen in between. We don't know, what state of emotion the players are going to be in, the weather conditions, the state of emotion of the other players. So I just think maybe sometimes there might be value in having quite an unpredictable session where we're almost, I was going to say setting traps, but again, that's not a very nice way of phrasing
Yeah,
it.
I mean,
Do
to
you know
me,
what I mean?
again, it's like Ian's like Ian spoke about this a lot. Thinking about the end in mind. So if you go through all the things that happen in competitive play, right? So like, there's going to be breaks, there's going to be slow play, there's going to be like people annoying you, there's going to be like playing partners you don't get. Like, I mean, you could do this in any sport. Is like, if I choose to play professional golf or like professional rugby or whatever it is, like, what are the things that I'm going to face? Right, and then simulating that in training, and then I would what I do is like tick off the main ones initially, and then go, right, what are the things, like what's guaranteed to happen if you play professional golf is the EasyJet or Ryanair or whoever are going to lose your clubs at some point, right? You're going to like face that situation. A couple of weeks ago, one of the guys that we weren't with but we knew, his clubs didn't turn up, right? So he's playing a challenge to the event. He's got no clubs, so he's having to use like scrape clubs together. Yeah. And so like what done in training before is, right at the start of the training session, is go, right, swap partners with the guy next to you. Right. You've got half an hour to train with that putter, and you're going out. You know?
I think
Well,
that's really interesting.
Yeah, that'd be a great strategy as a coach. Like, right, what are all the potential constraints that could be placed on this individual or groups of individuals over the course of a competition? And it's almost doing a big list, and then, right, how come over time, how can we design, or maybe what are the most obvious ones that we can design into training? Yeah, and like the club idea, right? Today we're going to swap clubs. It's just simple ways you can just manipulate training. Yeah.
I mean, Ed's Ed Colin, who I mean, he's sharing with, I think it was hurling players, where they knew they were going to get their facilities where they're training at. The dressing rooms were actually quite good, but they knew they were going to go to certain grounds that the the facilities were going to be terrible. So like he simulated that in training, where like they had to change in porter cabins. Yeah, yeah, and the players were
standard in Derby that when you play
yeah.
it in Derby
But
in a shed.
I mean, exactly. But like, it's just to me, it's always thinking about the end in mind, right?
Yeah.
Like a macro and a micro. You know, it's like looking at a bigger picture, going, what are all the constraints that we're going to face at some point?
I think some coaches are really take that into account. I remember when I was in New Zealand, I can never remember the lady's name. It was a brilliant coach of the silver, well, whatever they're called, and silver.
Silver Ferns here.
Is it Ferns in the netball? The
Yes,
netball
I
team.
think so. I think so. Yeah,
Yeah,
Silver Ferns.
and
Yeah.
she thought of this stuff a lot of the time, and they had a brilliant shooter at the time called Irene Van Dyke, who was about 18'3". And she was key. She shot 98% or something. But in one practice game, she told her, she just said, I want you to come for about 11. And she said, but doesn't the game start at 10:30? She said, yeah, but I want you to come. So I want to see how the rest are going to react
Yeah.
if you don't turn up, so that she prepared them. It wasn't obviously a major game, but it was still a game. And
Yeah.
then they played in I think it's a World Cup in Jamaica. And they said, what could they do to us? Like to upset us or whatever. And they said, well, if we're winning, they'll turn the lights out. So they simulated that in their training. And when they got over there, it actually happened. They said they were well ahead, and all of a sudden they had a light failure. So these are the things that they're almost the what ifs, aren't they? What you can
Yeah.
think about. Like even just daft little things, really. Like what happens if you break your shoelaces? Have you got another set in your bag? What happens if you've got, it starts raining? Are you prepared for that on the golf course? Like, as opposed to going in when it rains, like, so
So
no, I don't in rain.
So I'll give you an example of this, a what if that we're going to do. We're lucky enough in January with Swiss Golf, we go to Abu Dhabi, a golf course where they do anything to what we want, greenkeepers wise. They change the speed of the greens, whatever. So like we're seeing that like some of the players are struggling to adapt to different speeds of greens. So what we're going to do, there's three or four putting greens there. So we're going to get the greenkeepers to like do the greens at slower paces, faster paces, and then create exercises where they have to adapt.
Yeah.
So
So how do you help? And I know one of the things we talked about in the book, Pete, was learning. Golf is perfect for ecological dynamics, constraint-led approach, because the environment plays such a massive part in the game, and learning is you've just got to be incredibly adaptable. So we've talked a lot about that. Do you want to when we talked about it in the Tiger book, set the book up on that, didn't we? You want to talk a little bit about how you help them attune to the environment, maybe tell the Tiger story or something as well.
What, like the tiger playing in the dark, or like what's
I mean, there's that one as well, and then there's the 12th in the Masters.
yeah,
That
so
story is
that's
unbelievable.
the story, the tiger one where he won the 2019 Masters. In an interview, he's talked about the 12th hole, to give you kind of relevance for it, is a short par three, but it's quite a narrow green you hit into, and it's the wind swirls a lot in that area, and it's hard to pick up where the wind is. And he's playing the 11th and watched two players hit it in the water. But he's heard the sound of strike with one of the players who he played a lot of golf with, and he could hear that he struck it well, and he knows that player hits a lower ball flight than him. So he's already like picking up that information, going, well, he's must have missed something in the environment there, as in the wind is maybe into the face more than I think, because he struck it well. And again, a couple of his playing partners do something similar. He sees their ball stall in the air. So he chooses to hit a harder 9-iron because he can't feel it, but he's seen it with their ball flight, and like the baby years before, and it just gets over the bunker. And so he's used that information from from players in front of him who he's played golf with and the players he's playing with. So for me, that's just being greedy with information, where like a lot of players don't pick up that information as much.
And as a coach, how many people encourage people to pick up, to look, to search the environment for that information? And there's another piece to that, Pete, as well. He said, just before I hit, I saw the ripples on the pond go up.
Yeah.
So I knew the wind had gone up. And then I put a bit more into the shot and just clear, as Pete said, just cleared the bunker.
Yeah.
So this search for information, you know, how many coaches are actually helping that process in sports? Is big, you know, you're as you'd say, Pete, it's hungry for information. And you know, Gibson would talk about, you know, you're an information gatherer, aren't you?
Yeah,
you're trying to.
Absolutely.
Perception is about looking and searching for information to then exploit it.
So, yeah, so then to me, like, how would you practically apply that? You know, Ross Pinder and I talked about this years ago, and he helped me with this in regards to like, okay, let's put strategy in place where they like either go from short to long or long to short when they're scanning. You know, so you're doing verbal protocol, you know, think aloud stuff in training where you're going, right, I vividly remember doing it with a pro for 2-3 hours of an evening on a quiet par 3 hole where we're going to train at Swanson Golf Club. The third hole is like sheltered, but we're on a hill, it's in a valley. The minute your ball gets above the shelter, it gets hit by a wall of wind, but you don't feel it where you are. So you have to use information out in the environment to feel and see where that wind is. Well, not feel it because you can't feel it on the tee. So then put strategies in place where it's like scanning the environment for that information. So what are the bushes doing? What was it like what was the wind like in previous holes? Opens up conversations about whether wind's linear or not, which of course it isn't. Yeah, it like doesn't stay the same. I'm a wind pervert if you don't know that already. Like, and so I think it's like it's then helping the individual scan, you know, like, and creating safe spaces for them to do that initially, and then watching if they're doing it in competition after that or in training where you put a little bit more pressure on or consequences in. Don't know if that's answers your question, Ian. But,
no, it's great. I mean, it reminded me of a couple of stories from cricket where Greg Chaplow, I did a book chapter with and worked with at the National Cricket Centre in Brisbane. It was one of the greatest batsmen of all time. Was telling us a story of he couldn't pick Abdul Qadir, who was the Pakistan leg spinner at the time, brilliant bowler. And he said, I couldn't pick his googly, which is the ball that spins into the right-hander. He said, and I'm searching for the information. He said, and I'm watching his hand. He said, I'm watching his bit. He said, I just couldn't work it out. He said, and then I finally got it. He said, and he walked back to his mark. And when he turned around and put the ball in his hand to bowl the ball, if he was going to bowl a googly, he smiled. He said he'd obviously had massive success with this before. So every time he smiled after that, I knew that he was going to bowl a googly. Which reminded me of the Agassi story with Becker, isn't it? And maybe you could put that on the show notes through YouTube, Martin. We know the story where he's talking about he couldn't read his serve. Agassi couldn't read his serve, and he worked it out that it was where when he bounced the ball, it was where he pointed his tongue. And Becker, if he was going down the middle, he pointed his tongue straight to the middle. If he was going out wide, he put the tongue to the side of his mouth. And after that, he knew every time. He said, but the secret was not to let him know that. He said, and I told him years later after we were playing an exhibition same, and he said, I bloody knew it. He said, I knew that you were reading my mind. He said, no, just your tongue. So this is information that is out there, isn't it? And the experts search for this information and can pick it up and then exploit it. So, you know, I think that's a real good message for coaches is what information. There might be a giveaway, there might be a tell somewhere in an opponent, you know. that we can encourage them to search for, or design environments in. Like in basketball, depending on which foot is leading of the defender is the side you attack. Well, we could set that up. We can constrain the defenders, say, right, I want you to put your left foot forward, I want you to be square, I want you to put your right foot forward. And then can we invite them, can they pick up that information and exploit it?
Yeah.
So
I think, yeah, that's a good point. And also, while I'm thinking that, it's like, I'll share an example where I've maybe seen the world through my own eyes. I remember doing a junior, like the affordances of our action stuff, our action capabilities. So it's set up. You used to be lucky where I used to coach, where we didn't really have great facilities, so you let me shut the second and third hole off for junior coaching, right? So we could, like, basically on a Tuesday night, we had the second and third hole all ourselves for 8 juniors, and I create like lots of designs on these 2 holes, right? And one of the hole designs was I purposely put a tee under a tree, right? A par 3, and I put it under a tree, and one of the fathers was helping me, who was a good player, and his son's about to tee off in here, and I purposely put it under the tree so that it had a low shot, and they're like, okay, what are you seeing here? To the junior, and he's like, yeah, I'm gonna go over the tree, and we're like, no way, what? Like, that's not the shot. And he's like, I'm gonna go over the tree, and we're like, no, you hit it under the tree and it'll bounce to and he said, no, I'm gonna hit it over the tree, and he hits over the tree onto the green, and we're like, oh. and like, my point here is that, like, it's that co-creation with the player, and they'll see the world differently to you sometimes, and sometimes that the way they see the world is maybe slightly skewed to what their capabilities is, but it's letting them, like, explore that and not be biased by the way that you see the world in your domain. And I showed an example of this where that par 3 that we did group training on, I explained the par 3 earlier on, and it was, the pin was front right behind a bunker, and the greens were quite firm, so quite, the ball bounced a lot, and we had like 6 good players out, and 5 of us hit the ball same distance, and there was 1 player that hit the ball a lot further, a lot higher. So the 5 of us all describe how we seen it, and then Tom steps up and he's like, I can go for this flag, I can, like, hit a high fade, right, into this flag. But none of us had the capability at the moment, at that time, the other 5, to be able to do it. So I think it's also not bringing your own biases to the training environment.
I think that's a really important point around shared affordances, isn't it? And seeing the world through the eyes of your player, not through your eyes.
Walk a mile in a man's shoes.
I think those opportunities for free play, I think, are so important, or in structured play, just so you can explore things and understand where you're at, test the boundaries in terms of your capabilities without judgment. Because a lot of the time, that, if people are trying this, certainly in performance settings, that normally comes with consequences, doesn't it? Dressing down, or or you're Larry, or you're a bit of a maverick. But sometimes I think that's important to let people explore that. So, Pete, I know we sort of focus a lot on emotions. So let's say, I don't know all the levels of players that you work with, but for more, I won't call it technical, more of a skill perspective. So I don't know. I have been actually watching there was a recent PGA tour in America somewhere, I think, and the way they fade it and draw it and all these sort of things, which just blows my mind. How on earth anyone can do that with a golf ball? So how would you? So let's say a player was maybe not great at fading it or drawing it. They're the right terms, aren't they? When they move the ball in the air. Yeah. I mean, how would you start with that? I mean, from a constraints perspective, how would you work with players to develop those types of skills? That might be a really naive question. Is that why you're laughing here?
No, I'm laughing because this is what he did with me.
All right, brilliant. Here we go. Yeah, brilliant.
I mean, I'll give you a perfect example of Ian, where Ian was a slicer, so or a big fader of the ball, so we say,
pushed it, Pete, pushed it. I cover drove it basically, didn't I? I had a cover drive.
Yeah,
so, massive slicer.
Yeah, so Andy had has right shoulder injury from cricket as well, so his rotator cuff's not the greatest, right? So
I'm one knee now.
pardon?
And
I'm
one
one
name.
knee. He's only
Yeah,
on one knee
exactly.
now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. It's falling to bits. And yeah, so like spent the car journey up with Ian interviewing him on like all this stuff, his injuries, sports he's played, and then watch him hit balls for about 5 minutes and everything's curving to the right. And basically in my head, it's always like, can I get a task to do the shape the movement first? So like, can I do a task in the real environment, ideally, but a lot of time the golf course isn't available, time constraints or facilities. I'm lucky enough I've got a golf course right beside me, so I can do that. But in the winter it's normally pissing with rain in Scotland, so or cold, so we can't do that. So like task first. So I just literally just chucked a alignment rod out in front of him and said, like, took a couple of videos of he's swinging quite long, but it's around kind of his rotator cuff. He didn't really have much mobility to be able to rotate much. So just got him a basically scale of 1 to 10. What was like a 5 on the scale length of swing? Like, so give him a simple cue. So like you're like 10's your normal length. Give me 5 length on the backswing. Then threw a little kind of alignment rod out in front of him and said, like, just bend it like Beckham round that. So imagine that's a wall in front of you, like football wall, because I knew Ian knew football. And then you just got started right and then bend it round. And it was honestly a cigar lesson because Ian played lots of other sports. So he took it to a duck to water. So the task shaped his movement, and then what happened there, we just informed that with regards to Ian when he went home. Just said, right, well, we do that lots on the golf course and like see, like explore it more on the golf course. And Ian,
Yeah.
it worked, didn't it? You came down from like 28
Yeah.
to 12 or
Yeah.
something, didn't you? Yeah.
And I think now it works, it still works. We haven't got a driving range at the moment, which is a problem, but I used to then go out on the driving range and do it the other way as well. So I'd put a pole in front of me and I'd say, right, I've got to hit it left-hand side and fade it round, or right-hand side and draw it round. So I got a little bit better at controlling the shape of the flight a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
But I was also fortunate that on one of the first hole on one of our courses, if you land on the right side of the fairway on the first tee, there's a tree in the way. So the only way to get to the green is to actually fade it around the tree or go under it. So this again, it's what does the environment offer you? And I chose to, I don't have a very high ball flight because I don't have a very good swing. So I chose to fade it around, and so that emerges because you're playing that sort of not every round, but every few rounds, you've got that shot in front of you. So, but that transferred from the golf course is that concept of, creating the swing path that will lead to the outcome. So and that's the key point, isn't it? It's about the outcome. It's about the effect of your movement on the outcome, which is the crucial bit is ball flight in golf, really.
Yeah, so exactly. So for me, it's like always like task first, like environmental task. And then if it doesn't work that way, try and change the task. If that doesn't work, then I'd go cues. So like external cues. Like yesterday, a guy in yesterday who's not, we gave him external cues and like task-based stuff, it wasn't working, still slicing it. So I gave him a simple cue with regards to like basically a sticker in his back pocket, feeling like it's moving towards a chair on the way back, and we just did that at different speeds, and that helped. Yes, so that's more body focus, but we gave him a kind of external task to do that because the task wasn't working, and I only had an hour with them, right?
This is a really nice example that we talked about in our Tiger book in the Pete about there's a debate in skill acquisition about internal external focus. And I've always struggled with it because I think I've mentioned this on another podcast, is that people talk about external focus as a sticker on your shirt, or in typically the head of the golf club is seen as an external focus. But I've always thought that in Gibsonian terms, once you put a club in your hand, it becomes part of you. You want to make it part of you as quickly as you possibly can. And Pete's got a friend who had worked with some beginners on this, didn't he?
Yeah. And basically what Gordon relayed back was that you got beginners, half the group to just do normal practice, and the other half to hold the golf club in their hands as much as possible when they were out, and do normal practice in between sessions. And the ones that kind of held it in their hand more often got used to the kind of affordances of the tool, because essentially golf club's just a tool, like a rugby ball. Or I remember reading, I think it was Gordon Strachan talked about having a ball at his feet all the time, kicking a ball against the wall, and it's that tool in front of you, you're becoming more aware of what it can and can't do, and the weight of it and how it moves, and that, like, recently just did, so I'm segueing across onto something else here, but did some training with a former European tour player who's won 10 million on tour, won 6 times on tour, and we used occlusion glasses. So basically, like, on my mobile phone, we put glasses on him, and he's training against a Scottish internationalist player who's playing off +4, +5, but he's not, had the career Simon's had, right? And basically, we got them every time they had a shot. They had, it was like, I clicked immediately to make it dark so they couldn't see where the ball had went, and they had to call the feeling of where the ball had went. Simon, for 9 holes, even although he didn't hit every single shot perfectly, he called every single shot and putt, so you could feel it off the face, whereas like Aidan was about half. So even the poor shots that Simon hit, like, I've hit that right and low and right, he called it.
So you reckon that if you did that with rugby league, with kicking or a pass, of like, as soon as they kick the ball, as soon as the ball left their foot, if you turn the lights out, would they be able to know how good it was and how accurate it was? And if you did that and you took it away and use it as a training tool, would they become more aware of their movements?
I don't know. I know it's open for debate, but like in my experience with elite level golfers, the ones that are like really attuned to the club and can call it the minute they hit a shot, right, are pretty good at it. And the ones like, amateur golfers have no idea where that, most of them have no idea where that tool is in space a lot of the time when you ask them.
Yeah.
Yeah, for your rugby example, 100%, Ian. Yeah, you know the minute the ball leaves your hand, if that is going to hit the intended target or your teammate. Yeah. Just that
really
feel.
Interesting? Yeah, it's interesting on that, Pete. I've got what I think what they call them, forgiving clubs or whatever.
Yeah.
So if you don't hit it quite in the middle, it still gives you a reasonable shot.
Yeah.
But the awareness of the club, the sound and the feel is not there.
Yeah.
So I hit a shot last week and I thought that's absolute beauty. It felt, it went and it was 20 meters short. And you go, oh yeah, you didn't catch that well, you didn't hit that well, but there was no feedback from the club because the way that the clubs are designed is to try and help you. But we've talked about that maybe as a beginner or as a learner, it's not helpful. You might be better off going back to an old-fashioned club where you've got to hit the middle exactly. Otherwise you don't get the rewards.
Yeah, I mean, I do that with a lot of golfers where if they can't tell me, so I'll put like athlete's foot powder on the face for awareness. Like, so if they can't tell me where they've hit it on the club face after they hit it without looking, then their awareness of that and their ability to self-coach. So if you're not hitting the middle of the face with a golf club out in the golf course, Jack Nicklaus talked about this. Like he was taught in a way where he could self-coach himself. But I think you as a golf or coach, I think it's a feeling on my part if I've spent a lot of time with somebody and they can't self-coach themselves when they're competing. Shit's going bad and I fixed it. That's some of the best messages I get. Yeah.
Brilliant,
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like with George Fordy, and I don't know if well, it's probably a
Yeah.
bad example for Pete, but English rugby player. When
They
he's a
beat us. They
he
beat us, Martin. He's happy.
yeah, oh, they did, yeah. He kicks conversions, and I can't remember. I watched something recently, but when he kicks, he keeps his head down.
Yeah.
So and he won't look up until I think the ball's virtually gone through or not gone through. But there was like he was talking through it like in the game, so he was obviously mic'd up. But he was like he would kick it and he'd say, "Oh, got that," or no, that's nailed it, or black dot, whatever. So he knew straight away the minute he struck the ball. So I think highly attuned athletes they know these things. But yeah, I suppose the other thing there to consider is how can we help? So if you're using objects, so a ball, a racket, whatever, how can we maybe help that process? How can we become more attuned to that instrument, that tool? Because I think that's so important, isn't it? When there's an external um,
Yeah.
instrument, that you're
I mean,
using as
I
part of that
messed around
sport.
with the putter of actually putting elastoplast on either end of the putter,
Yeah.
on either side. So if I didn't hit the middle, it just blew, in
Mm.
practice. So you're getting again, or would you better off just using a very small putter head? I don't know.
I think it's a feedback part as well. Like if you've got more
Yeah.
feedback from that club, where a lot of the newer design golf clubs, you don't get as much feedback from.
Yeah.
So like I got a lot of individuals where we get them older golf clubs that they get more feedback on, so they can be aware of where they've hit it on the club face more. It basically amplifies the feedback essentially. And that example that we were talking about occlusion glasses earlier on, that was taken from Tiger Woods. So Tiger Woods' dad used to train him in the dark. So they played a game when he was a kid where he essentially after school he could stay up as late as he wanted, but he only had one ball, and they played in basically the dark. And the minute he lost the golf ball, the game was over. So he got, I think he said on an interview his best was 15 holes. So basically, the minute he hits it, because it's dark, he can't see where it's going, so he's got to call where it's going. So again, you're heightening the senses there of strike, like awareness of where the ball's going off the face.
Yeah. There's a lovely story, Martin, from Tim Galway's book, In a Game of Golf.
Oh yeah.
And he tells a story about this guy who played a game of golf with a blind golfer. They're on the putting green, and this guy is not a great putter, and he hits this putt, and the blind golfer said, "That's the worst putt I've ever heard."
Yeah.
Well,
It's the old feedback, isn't it? So are our athletes, individuals, over reliant on augmented feedback, or is practice and moving them more towards intrinsic feedback, being able to feel, sound, touch, feel, all these different things? It's so important. Yeah.
Well, this is where Pete uses scales a lot, don't you? In your coaching.
Yeah, it's 1 to 10 or words. I use them a lot. We talked about that in the constraints book as well, didn't we? Yeah, it's just like building awareness of, and use scales where, I mean, an individual recently where we gave him a cue of like any swing, and he won a professional tournament with it, but he was exploring the boundaries of that whilst in tournament as well. So like 10 was extreme version of what he was doing. 1 was like hold movement essentially. Yeah. And then linking that back to a ball flight always, though, like what he was trying to do with the ball.
Yeah, superb. Yeah. So I think there's a lot. I mean, we normally talk for hours, don't we, Pete? So a lot of rabbit holes. We only catch one at a time, though, Martin. So
hopefully that brought some of the stuff that constraints-led approach to life. But it's been massively helpful, and thank you, gents, for like putting all this stuff out there. I really, really appreciate it, because it's made me a better coach.
No, we're learning from the beauty is a collective. We're learning from everybody as well, and it's co-creating learning as well, I think. So, and my golf came on massively from working with you and then going out and applying the ideas on the course. And and everybody said to me, well, if you've got all this, why aren't you off scratch? Well, no, I didn't. It's not going to happen. I've got to hit it another 80 meters, which is another story.
I've got one knee and one shoulder. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, that's the point, isn't it? That it's not 1 and 2 gives you 3. It's like, well, for Ian, for example, there might be certain individual constraints that need tweaking and shaping before you can unlock other potential. So yeah, I think that's the thing for a coach, isn't it? You're on this continuous journey with a team or an individual to how can we keep pushing the boundaries, keep pushing forward. There isn't an end point. We're continuously dealing with these interacting constraints, getting a year older, a year slower, a year less flexible in a golf setting, a year less, not as strong as I used to be 5 years ago or whatever it might be. So yeah, continuous journey, I think, that's for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. All right.
Gents, fascinating chat, Pete. I've made a few notes. I've definitely got some takeaways around practice design that I think that would be useful in a rugby setting, or rugby league setting. So yeah, thanks for the chat. Been really interesting, and yeah, I look forward to speaking to you again at some point. So thank you.
Yeah.
Pleasure.
And I
Thanks for
think,
having me on.
yeah, and I think just to point people, if they are golfers and they want to know more, there's a practicethinkers.com, the podcast
Yep.
that Pete runs, Stu Morgan, and occasionally I'm on.
Yep.
And there's some fascinating conversations on that. And then we've got a Tiger book where we looked at what Tiger did, what's the science behind it, and then what it mean for your practice as well. And then the constraint-led golf book, which was the first one of the series.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which we've had fantastic feedback on that actually from coaches who are non-golfers as well. So I think that was the idea. We could learn from that, and the applied ideas in there I think are fantastic.
Yeah, I'm quite proud of that book, Ian, aren't we? Yeah, it's a good book.
Yeah, yeah, very good.
Ian, remind me, we'll have to put the links to everything you've just mentioned there in the show notes. But yeah, absolutely,
yeah, all good.
All right, well, thanks, Pete. Thanks, Ian, and yeah, really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for having me on.
Yes.